I told the counsel I'd return in an hour. She said that would be acceptable. The call ended. I paid for my coffee and walked 3 blocks to a print shop. I requested copies of every email I'd sent in the past month. I'd forwarded them to my personal account the night I submitted the billing report, standard practice for contractors. I printed 47 pages. I returned to the office at 3:20 p.m. Security waved me through without asking for identification. My badge still worked. The counsel met me in a small conference room on the 7th floor. She was in her 50s, navy suit, no jewelry except a watch. She introduced herself as Margaret Yuen. She worked directly for the board, not the executive team. She asked me to sit. She said the termination process had been conducted without board approval. She said my contract required board sign-off for early termination. She said the executive who dismissed me did not have that authority. I said nothing. She asked if I'd been given a termination letter. I said no. She asked if I'd been informed of any review process or appeal rights. I said no. She made notes on a legal pad. She said the firm would be conducting an internal review. She said my contract would be considered active during that period. She said I would continue to receive payment. She asked if I had any documentation related to my recent work. I placed the printed emails on the table. She reviewed the first 3 pages. Her expression didn't change. She asked if I could remain available for the next 2 weeks. I said yes. She thanked me and said someone would be in touch. I left the building at 4:10 p.m. I didn't hear anything for 6 days. My access to the internal systems remained active. I could log in, I could see shared drives, my email worked. But no one sent me messages. No one assigned me work. No one scheduled meetings. I checked my contract that evening. It was a standard consulting agreement, 40 pages. I'd signed it 8 months earlier without a lawyer. Most contractors don't hire lawyers for these. Section 11.3 covered termination. Either party could terminate with 30 days written notice. Early termination required mutual agreement or board approval in cases involving compliance work. I was classified as compliance support. The executive who fired me wasn't on the board. Section 14.2 covered dispute resolution. Any termination dispute required mediation before arbitration. The firm had to provide written grounds. I had 14 days to respond. I hadn't received written grounds. I made a folder on my laptop. I labeled it Timeline. I documented every interaction from the day I submitted the billing report. The report had been 22 pages. I'd identified $340,000 in billing discrepancies across 6 months. The invoices showed work that hadn't been performed. The hours didn't match the project logs. The client was a pharmaceutical company based in Sydney. I'd sent the report to 3 people: the executive, the CFO, and the compliance director. The executive responded within 2 hours. He thanked me for the thorough work. He said he'd review it with the client. He asked me to hold off on any further distribution. I didn't respond. The compliance director replied the next day. She said she'd discuss it with leadership. The CFO never replied. 2 weeks later, the executive called me into his office. He said the client had reviewed the findings. He said there had been a misunderstanding about billing codes. He said everything was resolved. I asked if I should update my report. He said that wouldn't be necessary. I asked if the compliance director needed a follow-up. He said he'd handle it. The meeting lasted 4 minutes. 1 week after that, I was fired in the conference room. On the 7th day after the board's call, I received an email from Margaret Yuen. The subject line read, "Contract Review. Next Steps." The email was 3 sentences. It said the firm was continuing its internal review. It said I should remain available. It said my contract status was under board consideration. I replied, "Understood. I remain available. I didn't ask questions. I didn't request timelines. I didn't mention the billing report. 2 days later, I received a calendar invitation. Meeting, contract status discussion. Time, Thursday, 2 p.m. Location, board conference room. Attendees, Margaret Yuen, board chair. Natalie. No other names listed. I accepted the invitation. I didn't tell anyone I was meeting with the board. I wore the same clothes I'd worn to every client meeting. Black trousers, white shirt. No patterns. I arrived 15 minutes early. Security directed me to the 9th floor. I'd never been to the 9th floor. The board conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows. The table seated 12. Only 2 people were present. Margaret Yuen sat on the left side. A man in his 60s sat at the head. He introduced himself as Richard Holt, board chair. He asked me to sit. He said the board had completed a preliminary review of my termination. He said several procedural violations had occurred. He said the executive who dismissed me had exceeded his authority. I said nothing. He said the board was also reviewing my compliance report from 3 weeks prior. I waited. He said the report raised concerns about billing practices. He said the board had not been informed of the report or its findings. He said that was a governance issue. Margaret Yuen slid a document across the table. She said it was a contract extension proposal. 6 months, same rate, continued compliance work, reporting directly to the board instead of the executive team. She said I had no obligation to accept. I read the document. 4 pages. The terms were identical to my original contract, except for the reporting line. I asked one question. Who has access to my work? Richard Holt said only the board and compliance director. I signed the extension. He said I'd receive a formal letter confirming my contract status. He said the executive team would be notified that afternoon. He said I should expect my access to be fully restored by Monday. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. I didn't return to the office that day. I went home and reviewed my timeline folder. 23 documented events, 14 emails, 2 meetings, 1 termination, 1 board intervention. I added the contract extension to the file. On Monday morning, my system access was fully restored. I had new credentials. My email signature had been updated. It now read, Natalie Brennan, Compliance Contractor, reporting to Board of Directors. I received an email from the Compliance Director at 9:47 a.m. Subject, Welcome back. The email said she was glad I'd be continuing. She said she'd forward me the current audit schedule. She said we'd meet on Wednesday to discuss priorities. I replied, Thank you. I'll review the schedule. At 11:30 a.m., I saw the executive in the hallway. He was walking toward the elevators. He glanced at me. His expression didn't change. He kept walking. I continued to my desk. I didn't speak to him. I didn't acknowledge him. I sat down and opened my laptop. The compliance director's name was Susan Chow. She'd been with the firm for 12 years. She managed a team of 4 internal auditors. I'd worked with her twice before my termination. We met in her office on Wednesday. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She said she wanted to clarify my new scope. She said the board had requested a full audit of client billing practices for the past fiscal year. She said I'd be leading the review. I asked if this was related to my previous report. She said yes. She said the board had concerns about oversight gaps. She said they wanted an independent contractor to conduct the review. She said my findings would go directly to them. I asked if the executive team would have visibility. She said they would receive a summary after the board's review. She handed me a folder. It contained the parameters for the audit. 12 clients, 18 months of billing records. Focus areas, invoice accuracy, hour validation, deliverable verification. The pharmaceutical client was on the list. I asked when the board wanted the report. She said 6 weeks. I said I'd need full access to project files and client correspondence. She said it was already arranged. I began the audit the next day. The first thing I reviewed was the pharmaceutical account. The billing had continued after my initial report. I pulled invoices from the past 3 weeks. The same patterns appeared. Hours billed for deliverables that didn't exist in the project logs. Meetings listed that weren't on any calendar. Consulting fees for work that had been completed months earlier. I cross-referenced the invoices with the internal time tracking system. The executive had approved every invoice personally. I documented each discrepancy in a spreadsheet. I included dates, amounts, and invoice numbers. I didn't make conclusions. I didn't use words like fraud or misconduct. I noted only what the records showed. By the end of week 1, I'd identified $470,000 in questionable billing across the pharmaceutical account alone. I moved to the second client on the list. Same patterns, different amounts. By the end of week 2, I'd reviewed 4 clients. The total discrepancies exceeded $890,000. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't send updates. I continued working. The executive sent me an email on day 16. Subject, audit scope. The email was brief. It said he'd heard I was conducting a billing review. It said he wanted to ensure I had the context for certain accounts. It said he'd be happy to meet and provide background. I read the email twice. I replied, "Thank you for the offer. The audit parameters were set by the board. I'll reach out if I need additional context." He didn't reply. 3 days later, I received a meeting invitation from him. Meeting. Billing review discussion. Time, Thursday, 10 a.m. Location, his office. I declined the invitation. I sent a brief note. I'm focused on completing the audit within the board's timeline. I'll provide findings through the formal reporting process. He sent another invitation the next day. Same subject, different time. I declined again. He stopped sending invitations. I submitted the audit report to the board on day 41. The report was 63 pages. It included detailed findings for all 12 clients. The total billing discrepancies exceeded $1.2 million. The patterns were consistent across multiple accounts. The executive had approved most of the invoices. I didn't make recommendations. I didn't suggest disciplinary action. I presented only what the records showed. I sent the report to Richard Holt and Margaret Ewan at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. I received an acknowledgement from Margaret Ewan at 5:02 p.m. She said the board would review the findings. She said they'd be in touch. I didn't hear anything for 8 days. On the 9th day, Margaret Ewan called me. She said the board had completed its review. She said they'd also engaged an external law firm to assess the findings. She said the matter was being treated as a governance and compliance issue. I asked if they needed additional information from me. She said not at this time. She said the board would be making decisions over the next 2 weeks. She said my contract would continue as planned. She said I should remain available for questions. I said I would. The call lasted 3 minutes. I didn't see the executive for the next week. His office was on the 5th floor. I worked on the 7th. Our paths didn't cross. But I heard things. The compliance director mentioned in passing that several senior leaders had been asked to provide documentation to the board. She didn't name anyone. She didn't elaborate. An analyst I'd worked with said there was talk of a special board meeting. He didn't know the topic. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I continued my regular work. On day 23, after submitting the audit, I received an email from Richard Holt. Subject, board decision, confidential. The email said the board had concluded its investigation. It said they'd identified significant failures in billing oversight and financial controls. It said corrective actions were being implemented. It said the executive had been placed on administrative leave, pending a final review. It said the firm was conducting a full reconciliation with affected clients. It said my contract would be extended for an additional 6 months to support the remediation process. The email ended with one line: "Your professionalism and thoroughness during this process have been exemplary." I didn't reply immediately. I saved the email to my timeline folder. Then I replied, "Thank you. I'm available to assist with next steps." The executive's administrative leave became permanent 3 weeks later. I learned about it the same way everyone else did: an all-staff email from the board. It said leadership changes were being made. It said the executive had separated from the firm effective immediately. It said the transition would be managed by the interim CFO. The email didn't mention the audit. It didn't mention billing discrepancies. It didn't mention my termination or my return. The firm issued a statement to clients 2 days later. It acknowledged billing errors. It said the firm was conducting refunds where appropriate. It said new oversight processes were being implemented. 3 clients terminated their contracts. The pharmaceutical company was one of them. I wasn't asked to contact any clients. I wasn't asked to explain anything. I continued my compliance work. 6 months later, my contract reached its natural end date. I'd completed the billing remediation work. I'd helped implement new financial controls. I'd trained 2 internal auditors on compliance documentation. The board offered me a permanent position, compliance manager, full benefits, reporting directly to the board. I reviewed the offer for 2 days. The salary was competitive. The role was stable. The work was legitimate. But I'd learned something during those months. I didn't want to stay in a place where I'd been escorted out in front of 43 people. I didn't want to work in a building where someone had fired me to protect billing fraud. I didn't want my professional identity tied to a firm that had needed a crisis to enforce its own policies. I declined the offer. I sent a brief email to Richard Holt. I thanked him for the opportunity. I said I decided to pursue independent consulting full-time. I said I'd be available for transition support through the end of the month. He replied within an hour. He said he understood. He said the firm was grateful for my work. He said I'd be welcome back if circumstances changed. I worked my final 2 weeks without ceremony. I returned my laptop on a Tuesday afternoon. I handed my badge to security. I walked out through the same lobby where I had been escorted out 9 months earlier. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. I took the elevator down to the street level and walked 3 blocks to the same cafe where I'd sat the day I was fired. I ordered the same coffee. The barista didn't recognize me. I sat by the window and opened my laptop. I had 4 emails from potential clients. All of them needed compliance audits. All of them had heard about my work through professional references. I replied to each one. Then I closed my laptop and looked out at Melbourne's streets. I'd been fired publicly for asking questions about billing fraud. The board had called me back the same day. The executive who fired me was gone. I was starting my own practice. I finished my coffee in silence.